Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you all to the 5th Annual National Book Awards at Concordia College. Before the conversation with the authors begins, I would like to ask Harold Augenbraum to join me at the podium. This past November, the National Book Foundation celebrated the 60th anniversary of the National Book Awards. That event marked the beginning of the 5th year of Concordia's partnership with the Foundation, an important collaboration made possible by Harold Augenbraum, the Foundation's Executive Director. Harold, I want to thank you publicly for the openness with which you responded to the call you got one day 5 years ago from Scott Olson, our professor of English, who said, "I have an idea I'd like you to consider." For embracing this special liberal arts college located in northwestern Minnesota, a long way from your center of operation in New York City. For establishing the Foundation's first National Book Awards campus program at Concordia, and subsequently helping us bring to campus the best American authors writing today. We also thank you for sharing your expertise through lectures and conversation with the members of our campus community. Harold, you should know, is not only the person who makes the National Book Awards happen. He is also a scholar in his own right. A graduate of Boston University, he is fluent in Spanish and French. He has published 6 books on Latino literature of the United States and is recognized as one of the country's foremost scholars on Latino literary studies. Harold has also written widely published reviews and articles on a range of other topics, including Edgar Allan Poe, Proust, Asian American writers, and he frequently lectures on these subjects. Before assuming the position of Executive Director of the National Book Foundation in 2004, Harold was the director of the Mercantile Library in New York City. During his 14 years at that library, he established the Center for World Literature, the Proust Society of America, the New York Mystery Festival, and he co-directed the National John Steinbeck celebration, among many other accomplishments. Harold, in recognition of your significant service to Concordia College in the establishment of the National Book Awards at Concordia, I am very pleased to present you with the President's Medallion Award.
Well, this is a very great honor, and it's really a surprise to me. I didn't know this was going to happen when the President called me up here. So I'm a bit of a loss for words, but I'll give it a go. When I came here for the first time 5 years ago, I'd never been to this area of the country. I'm a New Yorker. We don't really believe that anything beyond the Hudson River is worth anything. Although I have been to California once or twice, and it's okay. So I wasn't exactly sure what to expect, and after being here for 2 days, and I'm having a wonderful time. Scott Olson told me that if I came out here, he would buy me a bison steak, which I thought was a pretty good deal, and which he did, and which he has done every year since then, except this year when I didn't get my bison steak, and I'll never let him forget it. But somebody asked me after I'd been here 2 days what my impressions of the Fargo-Moorhead area were. And I said, there are 3 words I never thought I would hear in my entire life. And those words were, welcome to Fargo. So it really, the last 5 years, and I don't want to go on too much because I want to get to the program, the last 5 years, I think it's something that I personally have looked forward to, not only coming out here with 2 wonderful authors, but working with Scott and with Mark and with Tracy and with President Jolicoeur, because it really is one of the highlights of my year. And I'm not saying that only because of the bison steak. I really enjoy coming out here. I enjoy giving the talks to the faculty. I enjoy the interaction with the faculty, and I enjoy meeting the students. So I thank you very much for this, and I thank you for inviting me every year, and I hope you'll continue to do it because I really enjoy it. Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to invite Carrie Miller and our honored literary guest, Colum McCann, to the stage. But I also want to share with you a message that we got yesterday from Daniel Muinuddin, who was the other author, as many of you know, who we were expecting to have with us today. He ended up having visa problems in the UK, but he does have a U.S. passport, and it had nothing to do with that. This is the message he sent. He said, "I'm so very sorry not to have been with you. The UK Immigration Agency has swallowed my passport and won't disgorge, probably because I have visas for Uzbekistan and Egypt and so on. In any case, I hope that the event goes well and that I can join you at another time." Now, it is my great pleasure to turn the microphone over to our host for the evening, Carrie Miller, Minnesota Public Radio host of Mid-Morning and Talking Volumes.
Thanks, Pam. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back here on the campus of Concordia College for our 5th annual National Book Awards event. I'm Carrie Miller. I know we're in for a provocative and interesting conversation. Tonight, while we're gathered in Moorhead, Minnesota, we're going to travel far and wide with our guest. We're going to cross some literary borders. We're going to linger in an Irish coastal town. We'll dip into some of the shadowed corners of New York City. We'll even defy gravity. We'll talk about some of the themes that emerge in the linked stories in Colum McCann's collection. Mr. McCann has had the experience of seeing America through a newcomer's eyes, and he's thought a lot about how that has shaped his identity as a writer. He said, "I'm a New Yorker because I live in New York, but I'm definitely Irish, and I'll always be an Irish writer, no matter what." We'll talk about what that means. We'll talk about his emphasis on language and the music and the words of his prose. And we'll talk about the art of the ideal short story. Colum McCann describes it like this: short stories are a lovely little explosion of a moment. They can encapsulate an entire life purely by suggestion. Colum McCann's newest book is titled Let the Great World Spin. It's a National Book Award winner. Please welcome Colum McCann to Concordia College.
Thank you.
I've got to turn to this idea of how deeply embedded this idea of being an Irish writer is to you, even though you've been settled in New York City for a long time. And I just want to add something to what I read in the introduction that you've said about this. You said nobody can take that away. If I never set a book that touches on Irishness again, it still won't matter to the claim I'm an Irish writer. Why does that matter so much?
I suppose part of it is a little bit of a defense mechanism, like being away, being a person of two countries. I came here when I was 21. I took a bicycle across the United States. I never got to Minnesota or North Dakota on that particular trip, but I'm here now. But I found a whole new landscape, and what has interested me is the ability for stories to go across all sorts of borders and boundaries, and to say that we can belong in a lot of different places. But the Irish writer Brian Moore said, you know where you belong when you know where you're going to finally end up. And he'd been in exile in Canada, and he'd also lived in California. But he got buried on a headland in Northern Ireland. And I suppose it's not a morbid question, because I think these things are interesting to ponder. But if I were to be asked now where I'd end up getting scattered, well, a good deal of me would be in Ireland. A lot of me would be in New York, and a small amount of me would be actually down in southern Texas on the border with Mexico.
Of all places.
Yeah, where I spent some time, and I liked it down there too. But really, I'd like to be sort of anywhere. So maybe I'll just drop a little bit in Fargo.
All right. So defense mechanism because you want to make sure that your experience here doesn't change something that you consider essential about yourself?
We have to belong somewhere. And I suppose part of me felt that I think there's a certain part of the emigrant that has a desire to be wounded, and you go away in order to feel the song of home. And in order to understand home more fully, sometimes you need to go away. I think there's a certain desire in any writer to be wounded in a certain way. You know the way when, say, if you get a cut on your hand, you're aware of it, and it keeps you awake. I know there are truck drivers, for instance, who do little tricks like they'll pinch their hands to keep themselves awake. And I think in a certain way, you extend that metaphor to nationality. You sort of pinch yourself to remind yourself where you absolutely come from. But I live here now, and I have an American passport, I have an Irish passport. My kids are both American and Irish, and I'm comfortable with them. And I like the idea of literature crossing all these boundaries and blurring I think nationalism, as the 20th century so vividly showed, what it can be extremely dangerous.
Meaning?
Meaning that so much of what happened, say, during World War II and even World War I, was about nationalism, saying, we are this, this sort of people, and that's the only thing that's valid. I believe in a sort of being international, and the validation of being international is wonderful, because then you can cross these borders and be all sorts of different people and have access to different people. One of my great heroes is Michael Ondaatje, the Canadian writer. But Michael was born in Sri Lanka, right, educated in England, and became a Canadian citizen, then wrote his first book about the turn of the 20th century black jazz musician down in New Orleans. Nothing thrills me more than that idea that you can be sort of everywhere, at one particular time.
I wonder if you think that Americans embrace that, though. That idea of being from everywhere. Don't you find that Americans have a real deep connection to the idea about being American?
I'll tell you one thing about America that I've learned, not only from my travels, but in particular from literature, is that this culture is one of the most embracing cultures of other voices. I think just of the simple fact that I was allowed to be part of the National Book Award, that there are writers out there like Alexander Heyman, who is from Sarajevo, who gets the MacArthur. There's Edwidge Danticat, who comes from Haiti, and she is embraced as an American novelist. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. All these people, I'm not sure that there's another place in the world, certainly not Ireland, where you can go and hold on to your old nation and also embrace a new nation. And that's sort of what the dream of America is. I don't want to get like fuzzy about it because there's a lot of politics that goes on that I'm not like entirely engaged with. But in the politics of literature, one of the most interesting things to me is that you were allowed to come in and engage and tell that story. And I think in that sense, Americans are particularly radical.
Let me ask you about something that you've said about this idea of literature and the kind of American that you see yourself as. You said, literature can stop my heart and execute me for a moment, allow me to become someone else. It's another chance at history. It's also my opportunity to align myself with the sort of American that I would like to be. What's that mean?
To me, that means that I can enter any text and I have access to another body that's not mine, access to another culture, even another time, another geography that's not mine, but I can walk into a book, like a really good book, like Daniel's book, and become someone new. Like, part of me thinks that we're always trying to get rid of ourselves. I know for me that a lot of the joy I get out of writing literature is saying that I am no longer in that chair. You know, middle class, Irish, living in New York. Well, then suddenly I might write a book about being a Romani woman, a gypsy woman in the camps in Slovakia. And the country of literature is sort of borderless in that respect. And it strikes me that that aligns itself with what is at least the traditional dream of being able to be American is. Whether it's the practice or not is up for other people to understand. But I like the notion that we can go in and puff up our lungs and become someone else.
I interviewed the novelist Chang Rae Lee recently, who talked about his family came here from Korea, and he writes about some of the assimilation issues too. But one of the things he said was that he found it surprising, but that he realizes this every time that he sits down to write a new novel, that he's figuring out the universe that he lives in as he writes, that even while he may sit down thinking that he's got it all figured out, it's a whole new path of discovery to understand who he is and what this is and what it means to live in this dual identity.
You know, that's beautifully said. I would say that most writers don't have a clue what they're doing.
Really?
Seriously now, seriously. I mean, what happens to me is I get struck by an image and I can't shake that image out of my head or my heart, and so I have to take it on and I have to confront it.
No, is it literally an image, a photograph, a picture in your mind?
Well, with Let the Great World Spin, it was an idea that I wanted to write about 9/11, and that related back to an image that I'd read from Paul Auster of Philippe Petit walking between the Twin Towers. With a novel like Zoli, which is about the gypsy woman, it was literally a photograph of a woman who looked to me like Nadia Mandelstam or Anna Akhmatova, and I thought, wow, like who is this person, and how did she end up, being photographed in this way, and how did she get a face like that? With a novel like This Side of Brightness, where I lived with the homeless people in the subway tunnels of New York, it was all about who are the people who are going underground. So it starts off with a very bare question. So I don't think of any theme or any overarching issue. I'm not that smart. Honestly, I mean, people think that's disingenuous, but I really feel that's telling you the truth, that I get corralled by an odd thing, and the reason I explore is to explore why my head and my heart got corralled by that odd thing. And then years later, it's the readers who make sense of that for you, who make sense of the intelligence, things that are going on. I was talking to some of the professors here at Concordia today, and it was really interesting. I was talking about one of my other great heroes, Don DeLillo, who came into one of my classes at Hunter College, and all my students were asking him, how do you do it? Because he's the great master, and he really wasn't answering, except at one stage in the conversation he said, however, I seem to be the benefactor of an occasional revelation.
Way to bury the lead. Right?
Which is fantastic, right? But it's humble at the same time, because he doesn't absolutely know where it's coming from. I think other people come along and make sense of these things afterwards, which is why we have universities, which is why we expand, which is why, things become a sponge.
So you're saying that you were thinking, to talk specifically about Let the Great World Spin, you were thinking about what you might write about 9/11, and the image that lodged in your mind was Philip Petit,
yes,
on that wire between the towers.
Yeah, because I had some personal experiences. I was in New York at the time. My kids were very young. They reacted in certain ways. My father-in-law had been in the building. He got out. I had lost some friends in 9/11. And I thought, well, everything became a level ground of meaning. What was interesting to me was to walk the streets of New York and think that everything was charged. Like the woman eating a chocolate cake on September the 12th, 2001. Like, that was charged with meaning. But 2 days beforehand, it wasn't. It was like, how was she doing that? Or like that dust on your windowsill, or the parking tickets that piled up on a car outside your house the days after 9/11. Then finally, a flower gets put in where the parking tickets were. And then you know what that story was. So everything had a charge to it. And so my job as a novelist was to find something that had a charge for me and to try and work through it. It took me a number of years to get at the image. But it seemed to me that, and I've said this before and I don't want to repeat myself, but that Petit had done this spectacular act of creation, which is in perfect opposition to the equally spectacular, and I use that word judiciously and unjudiciously at the same time, act of destruction, the act of evil that occurred in 2001. So these two things were sort of at loggerheads with one another, and yet they balanced each other out in certain ways too.
What was the spectacular act of creation?
Well, the fact that he walked up in 1974, went into the World Trade Center towers, that he strung a tightrope from one side to the other, using the sort of the original American image of, he actually used a bow and arrow to get the cable eventually across. And then at 7 o'clock in the morning, he walked out, a quarter of a mile in the sky, went back and forth 8 times, danced on the wire, lay down on the wire, and said this was defying. He was the highest walking man in Manhattan ever. And now that the towers are gone, he's still the highest walking man.
That's right.
Yeah?
I'm going to ask you to read an excerpt from the beginning of the book where you're describing the walk. But I did want to ask you, I wondered if one of the images that you were struck by was, and this is the thing that stays with me, with all of the footage after 9/11, were those frozen moments of people looking up. And,
Right.
and not so much the action, but the reaction.
Right.
That you could see on their faces. Was that important?
Well,
As
so
you thought about this?
I thought about that a lot, and all those people who are close to the ground, who are walking their own little
Right.
sort of tightrope, because we all walk a tightrope, no matter what it happens to be. You know, whether we're 70 years old or 7 years old, sometimes it's 5 feet in the air. Sometimes the man or woman who are 25 feet in the air, they know how to fall. But sometimes the person who's 6 inches off the ground, they don't know how to fall, and they fall in the crudest, most difficult way. So for me, I was really, in the end, interested in all those people who are on the ground. So it's a book about like an Irish monk who lives in the Bronx. It's a book about hookers who are plying their trade on the streets, about artists, about mothers who lost their sons in Vietnam, all these sort of things that collaborate to make up a city or to make up a time or to make up who we are. But the most important thing for me became trying to discover a moment of grace that came out of all the difficulty. And that was, I suppose that was my main intention, to find some beauty in all the difficulty, to say that we can recover. Mm-hmm. I think we feel that now. I mean, in general, I know in New York and certainly in other areas of the country, people feel like, okay, you know, that happened, it was terrible, but we are moving on, you know, and we can learn to move on. And it's one of the great lessons, is that we can actually get up, and that there is a possibility of hope. Because I believe that hope is more daring than despair. Because I think to get to any true form, true essence of hope, you got to go through the really dark stuff first. And hope is a sort of higher form of despair, if you will. And that's really what interested me as a novelist. How do you get there without being twee? You know, I used to have an editor she was from Scotland, with my early manuscripts. If she didn't like something I was saying, she'd put like a pencil mark down along the side. She'd write twee with an exclamation mark.
Is that the worst kind of critique?
Oh God, to be twee, it's
writer
terrible. Yeah.
Does that mean too cute, too precious?
Yeah. The Irish form of it would be to be leprechaun-y.
Oh no.
I know corn translates in this town, right?
We know what leprechauns are too. They like Lucky Charms.
Right, exactly.
All right, would you read the first excerpt here?
I'm going to read a little excerpt and then jump forward to sort of the end of the chapter 2. Those who saw him hushed on Church Street, Liberty, Cortlandt, West Street, Fulton, Vesey. It was a silence that heard itself awful and beautiful. Some thought at first that it must have been a trick of the light, something to do with the weather, an accident of shadow fall. Others figured it might be the perfect city joke. Stand around and point upwards until people gathered, tilted their heads, nodded, affirmed, until all were staring upwards at nothing at all, like waiting for the end of a Lenny Bruce gag. But the longer they watched, the surer they were. He stood at the very edge of the building, shaped dark against the grey of the morning. A window washer, maybe, or a construction worker, or a jumper. Up there, at the height of 110 stories, utterly still, a dark toy against the cloudy sky. Later on in the same chapter. Way above, there was a movement. In the dark clothing, his every twitch counted. He folded over, a half thing bent, as if examining his shoes, like a pencil mark, most of which had been erased. The posture of a diver. And then they saw it. The watchers stood silent. Even those who had wanted the man to jump felt the air knocked out. They drew back and moaned. A body was sailing out into the middle of the air. He was gone. He'd done it. Some blessed themselves, closed their eyes, waited for the thump. The body twirled and caught and flipped, thrown around by the wind. And then a shout sounded across the watchers, a woman's voice. God, oh God, it's a shirt. It's just a shirt. It was falling, 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 yes, a sweatshirt fluttering, and then their eyes left the clothing in mid-air, because high above the man had unfolded upwards from his crouch, and a new hush settled over the copse above and the watchers below, a rush of emotion rippling amongst them, because the man had arisen from the bend, holding a long thin bar in his hands, jiggling it, testing its weight, bobbing it up and down in the air, a long black bar, so pliable that the ends swayed, and his gaze was fixed on the far tower, still wrapped in scaffolding, like a wounded thing waiting to be reached. And now the cable at his feet made sense to everyone, and whatever else it was, there would be no chance they could pull away now. No morning coffee, no conference room cigarette, no nonchalant carpet shuffle. The waiting had been made magical, and they watched as he lifted one dark, slippered foot like a man about to enter warm, grey water. The watchers below pulled in their breath all at once. The air felt suddenly shared. The man above was a word they seemed to know, though they had not heard it before. Out he went.
You're listening to a National Book Award conversation at Concordia College in Moorhead with author Colum McCann. His new book is titled Let the Great World Spin, and I'm Carrie Miller. You said something interesting to me before we came up on the stage about, I asked you if you had seen the documentary Man on Wire. This is about Philip Petit, and you said it terrified you.
It terrified the living bejesus out of me.
Why?
Because I was 2 years into my project, or 2.5 years, and I heard from someone, oh yeah, they're making a documentary about that. And I was like, oh God, I knew somebody would come along and do it. And then I heard it was like, no, they're making a really good documentary about it. And then I heard it was being played in the theater on the west side of Manhattan, the Lincoln Center, and I crawled across New York early in the morning, went to the earliest show because I didn't want people to see me coming out if I was weeping afterwards. That if I'd just done 2 years of work that went, if the film trumped the novel in some way. And in the end, it was a beautiful film. It's a really super documentary. It's called Man on Wire. But there was nothing in the film that intruded on what I had wanted to do.
What would it have been if the film had trumped the novel? I mean, how would that have happened?
Well, my favorite, or another one of my favorite writers, John Berger, says, really beautifully, he says, never again will a single story be told as if it were the only one, which is a really interesting notion about the democracy of literature. In other words, we see things from all sorts of different angles, which is also a comment on history as well. But my fear was that I had done something that also the documentary makers would have done as well. And if that were so, what was the point in doing it? And then I thought people would have thought that I ripped it off from them as well. But the interesting thing about Petit's Walk was, he did it. And it was absolutely stunningly beautiful. And it has inspired so many other things that, seem beautiful. Like there was a New Yorker cover, for instance, where there was the man on the wire, and then you turn the page, and it was the 5th anniversary of September 11th. Then there was no man on the wire. So what he did was he just, like all good art, inspires other art. We get out of Picasso, we get out of Beethoven, we get out of U2 or whatever it happens to be. If it's really good, it will spin other good art out of it.
Is it true that initially, when you were conceiving of the idea, you thought the focus might be the man on the wire, and gradually you came to this idea that no, it was really about what was going on beneath the wire on the streets?
You've done your research too well. You've been inside my head. The thing was that originally I thought, because I was disappointed at the politics that was going on in this country, which is my country, I was going to write a book which was a political allegory, and I was going to have the man on the wire, and he was going to fall. But that became sort of uninteresting to me, and the more time went away from 9/11, the more I was interested in what I was talking about, that process of recovery, that process of grace. And the more I got interested in the people who were on the ground and the tiny little anonymous moments. And I don't think it gives too much away to say that the novel comes back to two little African-American kids. They're probably more important in the novel than even Philippe Petit is. They get a cameo role as they walk out of the projects in the Bronx. But it struck me, as it's always sort of struck me, and the older I get, it strikes me even more, that the really valid stories come from the untold areas. And that's what I like to do. You know?
Why do you think you're realizing that now?
Well, I'm growing up. I'm out in my short pants. I have no hair anymore. I believe in empathy. I believe one of the failures of our time was the failure of empathy. And I don't believe that we have looked enough at the other. And I'm talking about myself too, mea culpa. That one of the most important things that we can do, just as people walking down the street, is try to understand what the other person is going through. Certainly on a political level, there's nothing more important than trying to understand what it might be like, for example, to be a woman in a market in Afghanistan, and to have a missile slam into that market, and I think we become different when we read, and I think we become different when we embrace newer, bigger, better stories that expand the world for us. And this is what I do think, what we were saying earlier about American literature, filling up its lungs with the other. I hope it translates itself all the way down through society, but I think it does, and it will.
I wanted to talk to you about the rhythm that I hear in your language. Your language sounds like it is meant to be read aloud. There's staccato rhythms there. Sometimes there's just flow. Is that just my impression, or is that important to you too? How it sounds?
It's incredibly important to me how it sounds. I think all the original storytellers, certainly in Ireland, they used to go around, like the ancient Shanachies, were the ones who went from town to town, and they would sometimes tell a story over the course of 3, 4, 5 nights. But just the rhythm and to try and get into the head. I love poetry, and I would want nothing more than to be a poet, but I can't be a poet because I'm sort of diseased by the notion that I'd have to end that line. And I just want to keep going because I can't shut up. The sound of it is, and I grew up with ballads and all sorts of things. I had a very normal sort of Irish upbringing. Like, I was middle class. My father was a journalist. My mum looked after the house and everything. And I had the worst thing that a novelist can have, which is a happy childhood. And I had to sort of go out and find other things. But to me, it seems important that you sort of go out and listen to everything else that's going on around you, the music.
So this is the other thing that I wondered about, that when you first came here from Ireland, if you remember what it was like to let the extremely different sound of America wash over you, and if that was important.
It was an amazing thing. I originally came here for 6 months when I was 17 years old, and I went to New York. I worked for Universal Press Syndicate, and I think on my second or third day, it was on the Avenue of the Americas outside the Time Life building. I lay down on the ground like some idiot. They must have thought I was like half dead or something. This would have been in the very early 80s. Probably there were loads of people half dead on the Avenue of America. So now that I think
Now
about
that you mentioned it.
But I looked up and I saw those extraordinary buildings and the way the light was completely changed and shadows and all sorts of things. And I thought, wow, I never thought that I could see something quite like this. And that was a really important thing. But then I got to see another side of America too, because I grew up on Kerouac, Ginsberg, Brodigan. I loved those books as a teenager. When I went down to, say, the Okefenokee Swamp in Georgia, or through Texas, or New Mexico, and small little towns, and people living these other lives, and it was a massive education for me,
and quite a difference to the ear.
Oh yeah, the ear. And the worst thing is, talking about the ear, like, I would go from place to place and I would like sing songs, but I have a fairly small repertoire of songs. But for one night, it's always fun, right? Now my poor wife has to listen to me. She says, "You're not going to sing the same song over and over and over again." But no, for me, the ear was tremendously important. Like, you listen, say, to the American South, and then to go to Russia and to hear a completely different form of music. I think if you think of life as a symphony and you think of all the notes you want to hit, isn't it nice to think that you could gather a little bit in piece from every place that you visited, and at the end of it all, you could hear it? Maybe that's what heaven is. Maybe we go up and or maybe hell as well. You get to hear the symphony of your life over and over again.
Another excerpt?
Oh, sure.
Right.
This excerpt is just a short piece about a mother who sends her son off to Vietnam. And I suppose Vietnam mapped itself out as Iraq for me in certain ways. I wanted to think about the mothers and fathers who'd sent their sons off to war. I don't think it needs any other explanation. She's a mathematician, that's the only thing. She wanted to tell him so much on the tarmac the day he left. The world is run by brutal men, and the surest proof is their armies. If they ask you to stand still, you should dance. If they ask you to burn the flag, wave it. If they ask you to murder, recreate. Theorem, anti-theorem, corollary, anti-corollary, underline it twice. It's all there in the numbers. Listen to your mother. Listen to me, Joshua. Look me in the eyes. I have something to tell you. But he stood, buzz-haired and red-cheeked in front of her, and she said nothing. Say something to him. That shine to his cheeks. Say something. Tell him. Tell him. But she just smiled. Solomon pressed the Star of David into his hands and turned away and said, "Be brave." She kissed his forehead goodbye. She noticed the way the back of his uniform creased and uncreased in perfect symmetry, and she just knew the moment she saw him go, that she was seeing him go forever. Hello, Central, give me heaven. I think my Joshua's there. I can't indulge this heart sickness, no. Spoon the coffee out and line the tea bags up. Imagine endurance. There's a logic to that. Imagine and hang on. So, how is it being dead, son? And would I like it?
I'm Carrie Miller. You're listening to a National Book Award conversation with author Colum McCann at Concordia College in Moorhead. I listened to that excerpt, and then I wanted to go back to this quote that I read where you talked about what short stories are. In your view, a lovely little explosion of a moment, they can encapsulate an entire life purely by suggestion. We got that, I think, in that excerpt that you read. Will you talk about what you mean by that?
It's like poems. It's like anything. I mean, we make up our minds about people sometimes in an instant. Like you hear stories about people falling in love, and and they know that they look across the room, and it's a short story. For other people, it's a novel. They take years before they fall in love with one another. They're different forms, and I think content finds the form. In other words, what you say will find the right way to say it if it's true and if it's decent and proper and right. Whether it be about love, whether it be about violence. Eventually, the story will be a short story if it's meant to be a short story, or it'll become a novel. I think of short stories as like imploding universes. They're so perfect. They all come down to like a little tiny moment. And I think of novels as exploding universes, and they're sending off their shrapnel in like dozens of different directions. In the end, they're both universes, and I like that idea. And I don't see a huge amount of difference between novels, short stories, or journalism, or playwriting.
Really?
No, I think it's really important that it all comes down to the art of writing. I meet journalists sometimes, and they're surprised by my reverence for good journalism, as if they sometimes apologize for themselves. And there's no need to apologize, because if they put the right word down on paper in the right way, they can affect things as profoundly as a Paul Muldoon poem or Seamus Heaney poem or something like that. I don't think that one form has more value than the other. I think it's all about the way the words are placed on the page and how it affects you and what it does to you.
I'm surprised that you don't see a big difference between the novel as the exploding universe and the short story as the imploding one, because every word matters in that short story, doesn't it?
Right.
You tell me whether this is true. Other writers have described this process of writing a short story as just paring and paring and paring down to the very essence of the idea, and it being a very difficult thing to do.
Right. But a novel should do the same thing, and a school paper should do the same thing, and a love letter to your friends or whatever it happened to be should probably try to do the same thing. I mean, I try as hard as I can with a novel to get it right. Occasionally, yeah, with a novel you can make mistakes. There are times when you can riff and you can get a little bit boring, and like people go on and they forgive you. There's not as much forgiveness with a short story. That's for sure. But I think in the end, for me, every word matters. It's like language, and it sustains us, and you better do it as well as you can at that particular time. I don't think the novel form is a fat form, I don't think it has, it doesn't have this. It should have the same amount of muscle, and the same amount of, and I really honestly think that journalism and playwriting and all sorts of things should have the same intent. In other words, I think that we should be at the edge all the time, and even pushing the edge or becoming the edge. Or I was thinking about earlier today a great quote by Vonnegut. He said, "We should be continually jumping off of cliffs and developing our wings on the way down." I just think it's fantastic. It's all about excellence. It's all about pushing yourself to the furthest point that you can. Because that like a lot of writers say, well, you should write about what you know about. But I'll be honest with you, that'd be so boring.
We are on radio.
We are on radio. We're on radio. That would be so boring.
That is the mantra, write what you know. Why isn't that right?
Because I'd be talking about sitting on my fat rear end in an apartment in New York, quite happy with 3 beautiful kids and a good relationship, and I really don't want to read that sort of fiction. I want to write what I want to read. And so the thing is, I don't want to write about exactly what I know. I want to expand my universe and write towards what I want to know. And that's the sort of book that always thrills me, when people are jumping off those cliffs and saying, okay, better get some membrane under here, because otherwise they're going to land with a big thump.
I think of that Vonnegut quote also as saying, always, always be taking risks. But
Right.
I think that's a tall order, isn't
Sure.
it, for a writer?
Sure. And you're always going to fall at some stage. I mean, you're going to write a bad book, and you're going to have to get up and fight again. One of my favorite quotes, and I tell my students this all the time: pin it above your desk, and we should probably all pin it above our bedboards, all sorts of places. No matter, try again, fail better.
Fail better.
Fail better. In other words, just keep going, but never feel that you've done it as well as you have done. I sometimes meet people who think that they've done it and that's it, and they become sort of satisfied and okay, but then you're sort of dead at that stage, because if you think you've achieved what you wanted to do, then what's the point? I think you got to continually push, or at least try to push those limits. Because there's always something better around the corner. And there's always a better way to think about hope, or a better way to think about love, or a better way to think about grace, or a better way to think about violence, or, all these different sort of things. So I would hope that, if I'm still around in 30 years, that I would be pushing the limits.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, though, does pushing the limits get more difficult after one has been lauded as a National Book Award winner? I mean, is there more at stake?
Possibly,
here?
Yeah, because possibly more people are looking at you, and possibly, you're more likely to fail. But so what? I mean, part of me thinks, bring it on, because I like the idea that at a certain stage I'm going to have to pick myself up off the ground and go back into the scrap again. And maybe I'll never have a book again that's say as successful, but it doesn't mean that I'm not gonna try to do it.
How much would that matter?
A lot. I mean, I'm just being honest. It would matter, yeah. I mean, I could be, say, oh no, it wouldn't matter to me at all. No, it wouldn't matter. I sort of want it, and I want to be able to, walk with my kids and have them still be sort of proud of the things that I might be doing. Do the sales matter? Absolutely they do. Does the money matter?
The truth.
Absolutely it does. But I mean, in the deep end, what's really important is that you can maybe say something that changes people, or that maybe breaks people's hearts in some sort of way. There's nothing better. Honestly, there's nothing better than people coming up, and it doesn't matter how many times it's said, like, I really enjoyed your novel, thank you for writing. That's an amazing thing for people to say. What a position of privilege. I'm so annoyed at writers when they sort of get blasé about that. I say, oh God. No, it's so fantastic that people might like your work. It's it really is a privilege.
That'll never get old.
No way. And it happened, I've been publishing for 20 years, and I've written 7 books, and my first book maybe sold 1,000 or 2,000 copies, but it didn't change the thrill from somebody saying, that was a good story, to yesterday when someone said, let the great world spin. That's a good story too. Although I have to tell you, my mother, I used to write letters home when I was traveling on my bicycle. And my mother, when I first published my first collection called Fish in the Slowback River, she said, oh, Colum, she says, it's a nice wee book, but, I really like the letters that you used to write home.
I hope she saved those.
They're around somewhere.
Yeah,
God, I don't want to see them. Honestly, I don't want to see them.
You mentioned Michael Ondaatje as being an author that you admire, but I wonder about the book maybe that sits on your bookshelf that when you're having, well, you describe this experience of writing a novel and getting the voice got lost for 6 weeks. So I wonder if there's a book on a bookshelf in your house that you turn to for some kind of inspiration or moment of grace, or you can do it, see it through, resilience, something like that.
Well, one of the really big books for me now is Ulysses by Joyce. I don't know if I'd necessarily crack that in order to get inspiration. I look to the poets a lot. So I'll crack open Seamus Heaney or James Galvin or Wendell Berry or any number of fantastic poets, because it seems like they have the music and they have it so condensed. So that would be the sort of thing that I would go to. I also listen to a lot of music when I write. Well, I live in New York.
In the midst of
yeah, because there's sirens outside and all sorts of things, and kids in the hallway. Like, where are my shoes? Where's my lunchbox?
So what kind of music are you listening to?
Van Morrison, a lot. So, Astral Weeks is always... I have a CD which plays 6 different CDs, and so it shuffles through them. Damien Rice, people like that. Music that can sort of transport you. And I suppose the music enters into the text in
I wondered
some
about
ways.
that.
And like when I was writing about Rudolf Nureyev, the Russian ballet dancer, I listened to a lot of hard Russian piano music, for instance. Some fantastic stuff that did, and just boom, 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 boom. And I suppose some of the rhythm that came out of that book was attributable to the music that I was listening to. Gypsy music. I listened to a lot of gypsy music for my novel Zoli. I don't know. I'm about to embark on a new novel, so it's set in. Well, I've already embarked on it. Set in New York. I don't know what I'm going to listen to there.
So have you chosen the playlist yet for that?
Jackhammers, sirens. No, I still think I'll go back to the old trustworthy ones, the Van Morrisons and David Grays of the world.
It's on my CD player right now.
David Gray?
Yeah.
David Gray?
I was listening to it on the drive up.
I listened to Brian Kennedy, who was an Irish singer, Frames, all this sort of stuff. I have a big load of CDs. Can
we close with an excerpt? One last?
Absolutely.
Great.
And the last excerpt has to do with a photograph that's in the book. And when I found this photograph, I knew I sort of had my novel. Because now, if I hold it up to you, you'll never be able to see it, but I'm going to hold it up anyway. This, by the way, if you're running why it's so tattered and torn, this is called the Advanced Reading Copy, and it's the first. I've been carrying it with me since last June. I have friends write things in it for me and everything. It's a real wreck now at this stage. Anyway, this is a photograph taken on August 1974 by a New York Daily News photographer at that stage. It later became New York Times, Vic DeLucia. Here are the 2 towers. Here is the plane. And here is the tightrope walker in the midst. This is not a photoshopped thing, of course. And then Philippe Petit is that little black spot down there. It's page 237 of the book, if you have it there in front of you. And this is sort of making some sense, I hope it makes sense, of that particular photograph. It's from a chapter called Roaring Seaward and I Go, October 2006. She often wonders what it is that holds that man so high in the air. What sort of ontological glue? Up there, in his haunted silhouette, a dark thing against the sky, a small stick figure in the vast expanse. The plane on the horizon, the tiny thread of rope between the edges of the buildings, the bar in his hands, the great spread of space. The photo was taken on the exact same day her mother died. It was one of the reasons she was attracted to it in the first place, the sheer fact that such beauty had occurred at the same time. She had found it yellowing and torn in a garage sale in San Francisco 4 years ago, at the bottom of a box of photographs. The world delivers its surprises. She bought it, got it framed, kept it with her as she went from hotel to hotel. A man high in the air while a plane disappears, it seems, into the edge of the building. One small scrap of history meeting a larger one. As if the walking man were somehow anticipating what would come later. The intrusion of time and history, the collision point of stories. We wait for the explosion, but it never occurs. The plane passes, the tightrope walker gets to the end of the wire, things don't fall apart. And it strikes her now as an enduring moment, the man alone against scale, still capable of myth in the face of all other evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Concordia College. Thank you to the audience. Colum McCann, thank you.
Thank you
very, very much.
Thank
Pleasure
you.
to have you here.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Colum McCann and Carrie Miller. We're so happy to have you back, Carrie. This has become a great habit.
For me, too.
Wonderful. And thank you, audience, for being with us this evening. You're welcome to join us in the atrium out there for more conversation and refreshments. Thank you.